Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Collider Connected. You know me, I'm Perry Nemiroff, but right now the spotlight is on one of my absolute favorites. It's Linda Cardellini. Welcome to the show. I am so thrilled you're here right now.
Thank you. Thanks, Perry. Nice to have you. Nice to see you well and safe.
Yes, and same to you. I am a fan of a whole lot of your work. And of course, we're here to put the spotlight on Dead to Me. But before we get there, I love hearing about early inspirations and what makes someone want to, jump feet first into this crazy industry. So was there any particular personal experience, a movie, a show, a performance that made you say, I got to be an actor?
Wow, that's a good question. I am sure there were, and I'm sure it happened several times. And sometimes it still happens to me when I'm watching something. I think, oh, I have to be doing this. And then other times I think I have to quit. So it really runs the gamut. But when I was young, I was always doing a show in the living room. I was kind of that kid. I was the youngest of four, and I probably needed attention. And I was very emotional. So I found this way of using my emotions for something other than just, I don't know, being picked on by my brother. So I went and I just sort of got involved with it. But at my school, they never really chose me for anything like that until we got a new teacher. And then when I was in sixth grade, they made everybody sing on a tape. I have a very small school. And after she called me into class after school, and I thought I was in trouble. And she said, I heard you sing, and would you like to be in a play? And of course I had wanted to, but I wasn't sure, was I going to be cool? I didn't know what I should and shouldn't do, but I said yes. And then I sort of went on from there. I was in our Christmas play at my little Catholic school. And then I went and I did The Music Man for our community theater, which she also ran, Karen, this wonderful woman who just took an interest in me. And it really sort of took somebody having an interest in what I did for me to feel like it was possible.
It's nice to hear you name drop her too.
She's the best.
Do you keep in touch with Karen? Has she been following?
I haven't met her in a long time, but we've kept in touch, many years. But she's a wonderful person.
Oh, wow. What about that original teacher that didn't cast you in anything?
I would
want to know what she would be thinking right now.
We'll see.
So it's one thing to say, I want to be an actor and I want to get into this industry. And it's another thing to really believe that you could make it a legitimate career. So is there any early role that you booked and you're like, I'm doing it now. I could really make this my thing?
Every role, because when I was coming up, I didn't know anybody really who was doing it for a living. I knew people who were trying, sort of, but it wasn't a logical choice for me at all. So the idea that I could get paid for it at all was thrilling for me. I was working at school at my school, and for minimum wage, and trying to go to school, and then trying to go to auditions, and I booked a job on a Saturday morning kids show. I could not have been happier. It was just like winning the lottery for me. And then every role I've ever gotten since that I've chosen to perform in has been a gift. Like it truly is the greatest job in the world when you have one. And when you don't, you're always concerned, no matter what level it is, because you're always looking for, the next thing that you want to do. Sometimes you have the choice to do things by your own choice, and you have lots of things in front of you, and sometimes you don't. And I've been through both.
Jumping off that idea, have you ever been in the kind of situation where, on the one hand, when you get opportunities, especially when you're first starting out, when you get opportunities that come your way, you don't want to say no to anything. But on the other hand, you want to make sure you're picking things that well suit the career and the image you want to build. Do you ever find a push-pull between the two things?
Sure. Because if everything came to you the way that you wanted to or imagined it, it would be easy. And it's never managed to be completely easy. But at first I just wanted to be able to do things that I liked, that were in ways that weren't going to sort of, make me. I remember the first time I was ever an extra on a set. When I came to Los Angeles, the first thing I did was I pulled one of those things off, the pole that said, if you want to be an extra, come be an extra. And I was an extra in this movie. It was non-union. I had to show up really early at this place. It was cold. They put us in these really short outfits, and it was about being in jail. And then the person announced, if you would like to take off your top, you could get $50 more, and you get your name in the credits. And for me, that was a test, because of course, like, you wanted to get your name in the credit, and I thought, well, no, I'm not doing that. And so that's a small example of what you're faced with all along, and you have to decide, even if you want something, what it is you want to do and what it is you're willing to do. I mean, granted, if I was, in some wonderful Shakespearean role with a major director, I may have thought about it differently, but I knew in that situation that was not going to be the right move for me, but luckily so, so that you make those decisions as you go along. And when you first start out, you can't start at the top. I could never. Some people, I think, luck out and they get picked off the street. And I had grandiose images of that happening to me in my mind, but that's not so much the reality.
You did have a very, very cool start with on-screen credits, though, because I am a child of the 90s, and I feel like you had a guest role on all of my favorite shows growing up. Of the bunch. Because also, when you were on a lot of the shows, they were already like, they had picked up, a significant amount of momentum. They were extremely popular. So which was the one of the bunch that made you the most nervous to jump into this super hot thing and kind of get into the groove that they had already found?
I mean, I was nervous before every job, to be honest. And my first job, I was lucky. I mean, I think I'd done like a couple little stints in some commercials and stuff like that, which I was never good at auditioning for commercials. I was terrible at it. But my first job, I was a series regular on the Saturday morning kids show. So I did 13 episodes, and that was really fun. I became very close to everybody I worked with. And then after that, I didn't work for a while. And then I was trying to book guest stars and auditioning for everything. And I wanted to move from sort of the children's realm to the adult, programming realm. But I mean, not adult programming realm. I didn't choose that route. But so I was just trying to find things, along the way, and then trying to find representation that could help me find those things along the way. And I just auditioned for everything. And I remember being really nervous about being on Third Rock from the Sun.
Ah.
And and it was prime time, and it was a hit show on NBC, and it was something that I had seen, and I recognized all those actors, and they were wonderful. It was really fun. And back then it was really fun for me because I came from theater to do live studio audience. So I enjoyed that. But there's a significant amount of nerves that go along with that.
Oh yeah, for sure. What would you say is the toughest thing to adjust to going from theater to a live audience, or any kind of television format for that matter?
I did not know how to hit a mark. Okay. I did not know how to hit a mark and, and sort of play toward camera. And I remember my first job on the kids show on Bone Chillers, I had to have a thing, an appliance on my neck and move, and then this maggot or something, something disgusting, moved underneath my skin, and I could not understand how to eat naturally and move my neck, and so it's sort of learning those kinds of things that don't seem to be so natural to you in terms of playing for a camera, and hitting a mark while not looking at it takes practice.
Well, I feel like you nailed hitting your marks and that kind of humor too when you got to Kenan and Kel, because for whatever reason, like I wasn't even aware of who you were at the time, but that episode for whatever reason is burned in my brain for life.
That is so funny. Yeah, well, I did a table read for the movie Good Burger, and I was just asked to come in and do a table read because they needed people for the table read. I don't think they intended on casting me, and then I got cast in the role, and then sort of developed this relationship with all those people. So it was really fun.
You guys can tell that you developed some sort of like friendship relationship on that, because when you if you go back and you watch that episode, it's just like, it's fun. Like the fun
I haven't seen that in 1 million years. But I was, thrilled to have that work. That movie, Good Burger, was the first movie, or one of my first movies, and I was so excited. It just seemed and I got to play a crazy person and do all this crazy stuff. And those, I mean, like all the people who worked there were fun and funny, and it was a good time.
I will say one of my favorite things about the rise of streaming services is that it gives you immediate access to all your favorite childhood shows.
Right.
Like I could just play and watch anything on the Nickelodeon days now.
A little bit like nail bitey for me.
I have a feeling I know the answer to this question, but of all the characters you've played, what would you say is the one thing that people legitimately get mad? Like they take out their anger from what that character did on you.
You know the answer.
I know the answer. I'm fishing for something right now.
It is from when I was on Boy Meets World and I broke up Cory and Topanga, which I had never seen that show really. I mean, I knew who the people on the show were because they were famous, but I didn't know what I was really walking into. I mean, I was older than I was playing. So, the people who were watching were like, you're younger than me. I'm sure, you were younger than me. So I was in college playing a teenager and, there it is.
What was your reaction when they asked you back for that future episode?
I was delighted. Are you kidding? I was so happy to have a job and they were so great to me. And the character was fun, it's fun to come in and do something that people don't necessarily like or it surprises people. I was put later in a similar situation on Mad Men where I came in and I sort of come in and bust that up a bit. So it's fun as a character. In real life, I remember it being one of the first times I was ever recognized. And a bunch of little kids ran up to me at my grammar school has this fair every year that we would all go to. And a bunch of the kids ran up to me and yelled homewrecker. And on one hand, I was shocked that they knew what homewrecker meant. And then I was also, it's that in between of being delighted and then also kind of nervous about the idea that somebody thinks that that's really you.
Yeah. It's like the double-edged sword of taking all this programming really seriously and it really meaning something to you, but also, sometimes not being able to draw the line.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that you could have done what you did on Freaks and Geeks without all of those guest starring opportunities first, or were those experiences key to really understanding how to make the most of a character and an opportunity like that?
I think those experiences were key in me learning what kind of material I liked and what kind of job I wanted to choose. I was up for a lot of things the year before. I didn't get any of them. Then I was sort of on a lot of people's minds. I think in some which way, shape or form. And there were 3 things that I was really, truly, between me and a few other people, which is always what everybody says, but it's a story of my life, me and a few other people. I think that there were 2 others that I was heavily in consideration for, and I chose Freaks and Geeks based on the script because I had read so much and I had worked a fair amount before that, unnoticed, but I had worked a lot, unnoticed by some in the industry, I would say, but and so when I chose that, it was because I chose it I really was one of the first times I was able to choose the material that I loved most. There were 3 things there and before me that I had worked hard to get to the point where it was me and a few other people. And, you go in and then when they decide that's your show based on what timing you audition for it, once you sign up for the screen test. And I pushed the other 2 aside and put all my eggs in the basket and for Freaks and Geeks and luckily got it because otherwise I would have been out all 3 jobs. But to me, that was the first time that I was really able to exercise the power of no. I had never really been able to be in a position to say no to anything that I liked, and I liked the other 2 things, just not as much. And so it was the first time I really got to exercise my own taste in some ways.
Oh, it's hard to imagine any other choice being the better choice considering what Freaks and Geeks has gone on to do. I mean, it's just incredible. It's 1 season and it's iconic and people still talk about it to this day nonstop, which is why I can't help myself with this next question. And I know you've probably answered it a million times over, but
Go ahead.
How has there not been a reunion show? Because I've followed everybody's remarks about a possible reunion over the years. I know some people are into it, some people are not. How can there not be one? And would you be down to do it at this point?
I mean, if everybody was in it, sure. But it depends. It depends. But people are in lots of different places in their lives, and I think more than anything, it would have to be about the material. I mean, forget whether or not any of us are willing to do it. I think you get something that's good enough. I think everybody involved is smart enough to realize when something is very good. I think that it's hard because that Freaks and Geeks was about a time where you're in between being an adult and a child, and how awkward that is, and how painful that is, and how gigantic those problems seem. And then when you grow out of them, you realize that there's such a bigger life around just that moment in time. So I think that there's an innocence and a fragility about that time in your life that I think might be harder to mine the same kind of comedy when they're older.
No, that's fair. It would definitely be a different kind of comedy. I feel like people always box coming of age into that particular age, but really, you're coming of age at every single stage in your life. So.
I know. I'm still waiting to grow up.
I feel like I never want to not be waiting to grow up, though.
Yeah.
I'm fine with it. So moving from Freaks and Geeks, which is a favorite of mine, to another one. ER was a very big deal in my life. It was the first vivid memory I have of event viewing where it's like every single Thursday night, my whole family got in a room together. And it was the first memory I have of like legitimately being on the verge of tears when a show was over, like feeling like a big part of my life was missing. So I have to ask you a little bit about that. When you first signed on for that role, did you have any idea that you would wind up doing 100+ episodes? No. Was the plan for it to be a long-term thing?
No, not at all. In fact, I had asked that I could only stay a year. And they said, we don't do that, but, and so we negotiated a year and a half, and I had these outs to do movies because I ended up doing Brokeback Mountain the first year that I was there. And I had just, not for any other reason, it's just that I get very deeply into something, and then I like to do something different, and I like to get very deeply into something else, and I like to sort of, I hope if people look at what I've done, you can see I try to zigzag and do different things. So I just didn't anticipate being in the same role for that much time at that time. And when you did television, me doing Dead to Me now, or even Bloodline, that's 10 episodes a year versus on ER, it's 22, 24 episodes sometimes. Mm-hmm. So it's a much bigger chunk of your work life that it takes up, because after 9 months of shooting ER, you have 3 months to do something else or just sort of rest up for the next 9 months. But being on that show and working with the actors that I was able to work with, they were so phenomenal. And the whole community of that show was so loving and so supportive and so creative that I just fell in love with living there and being there. And we got to do good work every day. So it was really fun. And I didn't expect that I would stay that long. And I just, every year I got to sort of re-up my contract and decide if I wanted to stay. And I stayed as long as I could.
Little question. Do you remember any of the medical jargon?
Oh my God. I mean, you have to do I remember that I always, of course, intubating and, there's all kinds of medical jargon that I do remember. And, there are certain things when I hear them now, when people are describing things, I understand better because I had to understand that whole vocabulary. But the hardest part for me about that show is it became very mathematical, because if you don't necessarily understand the numbers of somebody's, oxygen saturation or their blood, whatever it is, that blood pressure or whatever, if you get those numbers wrong, I mean, the patient is not going to make it. So there's a way of memorizing for that show as an actor that was different for me than memorizing for, say, I don't know, any, Bloodline or Dead to Me or even Scooby-Doo. There's all kinds of sort of mathematical ways of thinking about those numbers and trying to get them right.
So there was a good period of time between ER and Bloodline. What was it about Bloodline that made you want to commit to a whole nother series yet again?
I loved the way that Netflix sort of was starting out their original programming. We were one of their very first original shows. I loved the script. I liked the people involved. I knew Ben Mendelsohn and Kyle Chandler were going to play my two brothers, and I met with Glenn, one of our creators, and we talked about it. And the other two guys, Daniel and Todd, were on. I was in this room and they were on speakerphone, and we just sat there and talked for an hour about the family and the story, and it taking place in the Florida Keys, which was a place I had never been to. I'd only sort of heard about. And I loved Damages. I loved the way that Glenn Close and Rose Byrne's characters had such an incredible arc throughout the whole series, not just in the first season, but from the first season to the last season, these characters had these beautiful arcs, and there was comedy and there was drama and there was, it wasn't a comedy by any means, but there was still these moments of levity, and the performances were beautiful, especially by the two of them. So I really liked the way that they wrote those women. And we talked about it. And then as I was signing on, I heard that Sam Shepard and Sissy Spacek would be playing our parents. And I mean, that's royalty right there. So what is not to like about that? And the idea of being on Netflix and doing streaming and only being there for 10 episodes instead of, 22 or 25 gave me more options for my real life. I had a child by then, and I have a child, but I had become a mother, and there were other things that I wanted to do in my off time.
Did that experience on Bloodline give you more confidence in jumping into Dead to Me, knowing that it had a home at Netflix?
Yes, absolutely. Because I watched, I've been involved with so many different kinds of projects throughout my career, but I watched the freedom that Netflix gave the creators. And I think when you're signing on for a script and you're signing on for, whether it's a movie or it's a television show, you're signing on for the director and the writer, and you're signing on for that vision. And, sometimes that vision, there can be a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and that vision gets convoluted. Or sometimes you gamble on the right person, and sometimes you gamble on the wrong person. But typically when you jump into something, that's who you're putting your trust in. And so the idea that Netflix let the creators and the writers and the showrunners do what they envisioned was something that was appealing to me creatively, because I felt like I could trust the script that I was given.
Liz is something else. I'm just like in awe of her work and the entire writing team on this one, for that matter. When you first signed on for Dead to Me, were you the first to sign on, or did you know that Christina was already involved?
I knew Christina was already involved. I had heard about the script before. She was definitely involved. I had heard about it, and I remember somebody saying, there's the character of Jen, and I read it and I thought, well, this Judy character is amazing, But I think at that time, especially coming off of Bloodline, I was considered more of a, less free-spirited, I feel like, than Judy was. So when it came to me for Judy, I was delighted, especially with Christina, because Christina is so funny. I mean, she's a rare talent. She's very funny, and she's a very good actress, and she chooses her projects really wisely, in my opinion. So I know that she doesn't, she's I don't know. I think the more people you see involved that you trust, the easier it is to trust as well. And I wanted to work with her. I wanted to go, the idea of having two female leads and to be able to go head to head but be so different. I mean, when you read that script, the way that Liz created it, there's no confusing the two of them. They're so different. And a lot of times you can read a script and they have two female characters and they're maybe not even at the center of it, but you could kind of interchange their lines, or you could interchange their ability to be in a scene, and it doesn't change the project. But this was not that. Mm-hmm. And I had worked with Jessica Elbaum, who's one of our producers. I'd worked with her several times, and I love her, and I love the people that she surrounds herself when she works. I met with Liz, and Liz said, I want to work with good people who are kind people. And that to me is very important. What I do on set every day is very different than maybe what comes out afterwards, but that's out of my hands. And so my day to day is being on set with people. So I want to make sure that, if I'm going to take time away from my family to go work somewhere, that I'm enjoying myself. So that was important.
Not to veer off the dead to me path, but something you brought up about, characters that could be interchangeable in a movie made me think, also on your filmography, you have played the wife a lot.
Yes.
But I feel like every single time, or most times that I could think of off the top of my head at least, that you've done it, you've managed to take a supporting role like that could just be labeled the wife and make sure that character has presence. So when you do accept a role like that, how do you make sure that in your mind you're able to take that and make something more of it?
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Those are, for me, people are wives. People are mothers, people are caretakers, people are. So for me, when I accept roles like, when I accept as certain roles, there has to be something in them that makes that part important for the script, not to just be there, just to be there. And for me, certain roles, if you don't believe in the relationship, then even though it's told from perhaps the lead male's perspective, it doesn't mean as much unless you have him wanting to come home, or unless you have some kind of compassion for the person who has to deal with him, unless you know what I mean. So to me, when I choose those roles, there has to be something in it that makes her real and come from, typically those roles are coming from a place of love. And so if that love can be real, and maybe that justifies somebody's behavior, maybe that, whatever that is, it has to do something. It has to serve some kind of purpose for the story. A lot of times, I don't just look at the script for what my role is. I look at the script for what serves the story. And if a character can serve the story in a meaningful way, even if it's not the starring role, that's exciting to me. And also looking at who I get to work with. Like I've played the wife to some of my favorite actors, and it wouldn't matter if I was playing their boss, or if I was playing their teacher, or if I was playing their doctor. It's just fun to work with those people. So, and to share the workspace with them, regardless of gender or role or whatever it is.
100%. I totally respect that approach to it and just how you've been able to make the most of it. Dead to me, though. Back to working with Christina, because like my mind can't compute how seamless your back and forths are. Also, when I think about what's required on a production, just with someone not stepping over someone else's line, there's something about how you two go back and forth that is so on point and pitch perfect. Is that something that naturally came to the two of you, or did you have to kind of, rehearse it a bit before you really got that flow going?
Well, that's the beauty of, I think Liz Feldman, our creator, sort of knows how to capitalize on our strengths, I feel like. And I think that Christina and I also, when we're doing those, some of my favorite stuff, it was written originally that there is, a word, and then that we talk over each other, and they're in ellipses, and they were very, very small. And as soon as we started doing that, this other thing happened between us, because the characters are written to be so different and so separate, that we can be aiming for the exact same thing and doing it completely different ways. And then it becomes comical because they're trying to get to the same goal, but they're just doing it in two completely different ways that are very, Jen or Judy. So it's really fun. And then we start with a few ellipses, and then, we get, go ahead and do that. Do your Jen and Judy. Now we get to go ahead and do your Jen and Judy stuff. And we just go, and we just sort of do it until one of us breaks, and we try to make each other laugh.
I truly cannot get enough of it. Apologies for the broad question here, but do you have a favorite scene in season 1 or 2? Because I just have too many to name.
That's hard.
Yeah.
Also, too, because my memory is sort of like a sieve. It holds on to something for a very short amount of time. I have a very good short-term memory, but my long-term memory, not so much. So, which is good for my job. Clears room for other things all the time. It's constantly
be able to
deleting the trash. But not that that's trash, but you know what I mean. I would say season 1, season 2. Oh, I mean, season 2, there's a lot of fun stuff. I love, some of my favorite stuff is really when her and I get to do that. And there's one scene this season that ends with 2 lines that I think are so we thought they were so hilarious and so ridiculous, and we improv them. And it's when she tells me to, eat something, and I tell her I can't. I would, but I'm already taken. And that was just us sort of going back and forth with each other. And it was so outrageous that we never dreamed that it would make it in the show. And it just made us laugh so hard that every time we said it, because then you have to do it over and over again. I mean, you might find something, and then you do it over and over again. So. But to me, that's the thing about Jen and Judy, is they have this relationship that I feel like is familiar to people who have good close friends, where you say the craziest shit to each other and it makes you laugh, So I don't know. I thought that was pretty funny. But favorite scenes, I think hardest scene was definitely the garage. That is definitely the hardest scene that we've done. Which only rivals the first season where we're sitting out on the chairs and talking about with the confessing of that. But the confessions, the major confessions, are doozies. Also, truck backing up outside my house. So sorry about that.
I'm surprised the phone hasn't rang, because apparently I live in a house now with a landline.
Yeah, well, there you go.
That's the thing. I will brand this with a big spoiler warning, so feel free to talk about it, and we'll make sure
that's the spoiler alert track.
Right there. It was right on cue.
Bringing in a lot of spoilers.
The scene that happens after your talk in the garage in season 2 is one of the most powerful, in my opinion, at least, for Judy, because she's basically spent the large majority of the series directing all of her anger inwards towards herself, and she's finally kind of letting it come out and directing it at someone else. So just for you, did that moment kind of feel like, I don't know, like a weight has lifted or a big release because the character was going through that kind of experience?
Yeah, it's actually really challenging. It's one of the biggest challenges of the part, although I have to say that there's a lot of challenges with that part. Luckily so, I'm so lucky. But one of them is, it's so much easier to play anger than it is to deflect all of the things that Judy has. It's much easier to let things escalate in a scene and let it feel good and get it out, Yeah, we emote, but there's this thing about anger that when you lock in, especially if you lock in an argument, it took retraining myself not to be angry. So some of that is evident in how locked up it is even in my body. So that is a huge release, and it's something that I was waiting to do, just personally as an actor, because I'm hanging on to so much in my body that just being able to do that felt good. And you want the audience to feel like it's earned at some point too. But then she turns right back around and takes it out on herself. So, yeah. Which I think that's a fascinating piece of the character, and it's something that we sort of stumbled upon in the first season that wasn't exactly written. And just came from me sort of researching people who can't quite get angry, and how it turns into this self-loathing, and I don't know, it can turn into two other things that way.
Okay, to follow up on that first, have you guys ever talked about maybe exploring, like, I guess kind of like the toxicity of friendships a little? Because now I'm thinking that in all of season 1, Judy is constantly saying sorry to Steve, and then she kind of adjusts and does that with Jen too. So are there any lingering effects that we might see continue on from their back and forth in that respect?
Possibly. I mean, here's the thing. Liz will tell me as much as she knows when I ask, and whatever it is that she comes up with, her and the writers, they're so phenomenal. It is something that I would have never thought of. So, but most things are there for a reason, I think, with Dead to Me, because there are so many turns and twists, and that there are seeds planted for reasons. And I think they come back around. And it's always a great joy to me when I realize when I'm reading it, oh, that's something that we laid out in episode 1, that now we're seeing it sort of crop up in episode 7. That I love that.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's part of the reason why it can be an absolute hilarious blast, but also have real meaning, not just to the characters, but just lessons about forgiveness that you could take with you and growth and self-worth. So I love that. One more spoiler question before I leave this territory here. So in season 2, Jen kind of has a parallel storyline to what Judy went through in season 1. But the thing is, the gray area in this one is a lot different because Jen actually killed someone. She murdered someone. So what were kind of the, I guess, the conversations you guys had behind the scenes in order to make sure that even though she did do that to Steve, the audience is still rooting for her to get away with it?
Yeah, well, that's the trick of the show. I mean, that to me is the most incredible thing that Liz manages to do with the show is you would never in a million years want Jen and Judy to be friends if you read on paper what in the first season necessarily what had happened. And I always felt like if you can root for them to be friends, we have accomplished the impossible because it's counterintuitive in some ways. Yet when Liz lays it out, it seems so true somehow and natural that you want that to happen. And I think that also is, between Christina and I on set too, we have just such a wonderful relationship and a wonderful working relationship. And I think that texture really helps it feel beyond all of the circumstances that are happening in the plot. Season 2, it's interesting because Judy forgives fast in some ways. And for me, it was a wonderful challenge to be able to make that forgiveness seem really earnest and true. And it is. She doesn't want to. And I think how they wrote it was so beautiful. I was just she's tired of feeling sad and angry, and to be doing that to sort of not forgive her would be punishment for herself. And I think that is very true for Judy, but would not be true for other people.
It plays so well. Like, I find it so interesting when I have a feeling that I can't assess in a written review kind of way exactly why I'm like, okay, I'm glad this happened with them, even though she did what she did. It's a very difficult thing to process, but you guys pull it off so well and kind of did exactly what you just described.
Thank you. Well, that's life, right? You don't necessarily love all the people you should. You know what I mean? You don't make the right decisions when you could have. And so I think that's the complexity of the relationships. And for me too, when Judy mourns Steve the way that she does, that is complex, and for that reason makes it real.
One more Dead to Me question. Yes. Not a spoiler. Okay. Have you played the Dead to Me drinking game?
No. God, no. I'd be passed out on the floor.
I don't know who came up with that, but
I don't know. Probably several people at the same time. It's one of those things that seems like it's easy to think of because they're constantly drinking or smoking.
I really want to give it a shot, but I also want to wake up for my interviews the next morning.
Yeah. If you smoked as much weed as Judy too, you'd be.
Oh God.
The whole time too. So
if you survive round 1 of the game, that's round 2. Before I let you go, 2 movie questions for you. This is going to come as no surprise, but I wanted to ask about the MCU. What is the biggest difference between your original expectations for Laura when you first signed on for Age of Ultron and where the role wound up going in Endgame? Or I guess to, condense that a little, was there ever any discussions about more for her?
Oh, I mean, it was one of those things where I was sort of, brought into the universe, and it truly is its own universe. It is its own entity with this fandom that is incredible. And to be part of it is, I don't know, it's pretty fun. I mean, my daughter's friends love it. It's one of those kinds of things, So it's always fun. I mean, would I love to see a Laura Barton movie? Sure. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think people are more interested in the superheroes.
I don't think you're alone on that, though. I'm serious, like dead serious, rooting for some sort of Marvel movie where it's more, grounded, reality-based, just the day-to-day life. And I feel like Laura and Clint and their family would be the perfect way to explore that.
Yeah. I mean, she's the wife, but you could see it from the wife's perspective, right?
and you could take a wife role and make it so much more, and then we all win. One more movie that you just had come out recently that I was curious about was Capone, of course, working with Josh Trank. And I hope I phrased this correctly, but from the reporter perspective on the outside, we're busy covering Fantastic Four like crazy and hearing about everything, and things are going wrong. And we're all like, oh no, now Josh is never going to make another movie again. Then he makes Capone his way, exactly how he wants to. So is that just a result of our limited perspective of what's going on? Or when you consider taking a role like that, does any of that information come your way, and do you have to parse through it?
I didn't parse through that at all. I really didn't. I met Josh, I had received some interest and letters and I just was asked to join, and I met Josh, and I had seen Chronicle, which I thought was fantastic, and I met Josh, and I loved him. I think he's so interesting. He's so smart. He is very generous. Tom loves him. I love Tom's work. Nobody better. There was never any consideration about any of that stuff to me, because being on this side, that there are stories told about people, and there are multiple sides of those stories, and who knows what's what. So I don't really ever go into anything based on what I've heard. And I as a result, I tend to have wonderful experiences with people that people ask me, oh, so-and-so had a bad experience. And then I will be completely shocked, because I am sort of out of it. I don't really pay that much attention to a lot of that stuff at times. I mean, it ebbs and flows, but also you never know. You never know what somebody's going through in any period of time. Whether you hear a story about an actor or actress who misbehaves, or a producer or a director or whoever it is, I think, it's a long life in this business if you're lucky, and you will go through things, and you have to hope that that's part of it too. It's like life, So none of that mattered to me. I met him. I loved him. I loved the script. I loved the idea of doing something that was so out of left field that people thought they were going to see this, shoot 'em up, Capone movie, and it's the opposite of what you're expecting. I liked the sort of left turn of that, and everybody involved. I had such a good time on that movie. And Josh is at the top of bringing everybody in. We had the best time making that movie. We were all in this mansion in Florida making this movie, and it was a real exercise in imagination and fun and challenging, and it was a party. We had a great time. So none of that stuff matters. What matters to me is day to day, and if I feel like I can be treated with love and respect, and if I can treat the work with love and respect, then that's what I do.
Well, as someone with that mentality, for a final question here, who is someone you've worked with that you think is doing something to change the industry for the better?
Well, let me think about that. Almost everybody that I care about and that I have worked with and that I've continued to have a relationship with. I will talk to some of my friends, and they'll be telling me, I just got off the phone with the children's hospital. I was cheering up kids, or I just sent all this food to these workers, or, hey, do you want to do this thing with me? Or, I did this thing for charity, and I asked James to ask me the questions, James Marsden, and he said, I'll match you. I mean, I think there's a lot of goodwill and good-hearted people. In terms of making the industry different, I think we're a little bit in a holding pattern at the moment, trying to figure out what the future is. And I look forward to figuring, to seeing who's able to take the best care of people while we move forward, and who's going to put people's lives over the industry part of it, and how they're going to move forward with that in a positive and healthy way. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I think the industry will change in some ways.
To anybody who has not watched Dead to Me, what are you waiting for? It's on Netflix, and it's so good. Hands down, not just because I'm talking to you right now, but hands down, one of my favorite binge watches of all time. It will not disappoint. Linda, congratulations on all your success, and in particular right now, that show, because it's wonderful.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for all your wonderful questions, and stay safe and be well to you and to everybody.